Could the Denver Broncos and inside linebacker Josey Jewell have mutual interest in re-signing? Well, the Denver Broncos will be boots on the ground in Indianapolis this week for the NFL Scouting Combine, where various NFL agents who want to maybe negotiate some deals about their clients, they'll be there. We'll see some traction there. Plus, who are some of Sayre and I's favorite offensive tackle prospects in this year's NFL draft that could fit Nathaniel Hackett's coaching scheme? You get that and much more in today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome back into a brand new episode, Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast here on the Locked on NFL Network, your team every day. From the South Stands to the end zone, I'm your host. It's always Cody Roark, joined alongside by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger. Both of us, we're thrilled to cover the Denver Broncos for the Locked on Network and 9 News. Thank you once again, Broncos country, for making Locked on Broncos your first listen of the day every single day, whether you listen to our favorite audio podcasting platform, free and available everywhere you get your podcast, or if you want to watch us in 4K high definition here on YouTube, all you got to do is hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage. Sayre, football season is over. I didn't know what to do with myself for the second consecutive Sunday in a row. However, here we are. We're going to talk about the NFL Scouting Combine. So at least there's some events in between, like the dead period of football, that we have football stuff going on. I'm stoked about the Combine this week, but not just from a prospect standpoint, but because we could have some traction on some in-house free agents here for the Denver Broncos.
It's all good things. It's all good things. I love the Combine. I love the rumor mill. The rumor mill is always churning when the Combine rolls around, and I love watching these guys work out, man. It's cool watching people run as fast as these guys run. Like, I always love to see, who's going to run the sub 4.4 this year. How's it going to change everybody's opinion of these guys? Defensive linemen running sub 5 seconds. Offensive linemen, like we're going to talk about today, offensive tackles specifically, that can run fast and jump high. I mean, it's crazy what these athletes can do nowadays. And so it's just cool to kind of see these guys perform. See them in it, like George Paton said on the latest episode, Behind the Broncos. It's another competitive environment. Of course, the Combine is not where you put all your stock in a draft prospect, but it's a piece of the puzzle. It's a piece of the evaluation puzzle. And we know this. Since George Paton took over as general manager, those big-time athletes, that's who he targets. So watching the Combine this week, look for the guys that put together the best workouts. I mean, it seems, kind of like, well, yeah, of course, every NFL team wants the best athletes, right? But really, George Paton highly prioritized those particular guys last year. So, Cody, I can't wait to break this all down. I can't wait to take a look at it in depth. I think we're going to have a blast.
No, spot on too. And real quick, going to that second episode of Behind the Broncos here with Nathaniel Hackett. Loved what we saw there. But for George Paton and Darren Muji, like boots on the ground, traveling everywhere, you can see why Muji is his right-hand guy, assistant GM, and will obviously be an NFL GM for some team. Could be in the next year or so. I mean, his rise has been very quick in the NFL here. But being able to see George Paton go to these things, talk to people, see them up close and personal, he said that's what he values most, seeing them live, seeing them in person, because you get more of a feel than you do when you watch them on tape. So a lot to break down here today. But the NFL Scouting Combine will be here this weekend. Luckily enough, Sarah, the NFL went back on what they had initially proposed. They said that players training for the Combine will have to bubble. They wouldn't be able to work with their trainers or their medical, physical therapists in between that. And that was something that really set off a lot of agents, and rightfully so. It was going to change the format here. The NFL said, fine, at your own risk, we'll remove the bubble. You get to bring whoever you want, but it's at your own risk. So now the Combine is going to go on as expected, as we all planned. But a lot of people think that the Scouting Combine is just for watching these athletes. Well, the Combine isn't just for evaluating potential prospects that teams want to learn from and learn a little bit more about. It's also about being able to interact with people, with player representatives, because look, George Paton, Nathaniel Hackett will be in Indianapolis. They're already there, and they'll have an opportunity. This is like the circulation of information that we're going to see. And I mentioned agents will be there. This gives the Broncos a chance to negotiate directly or have conversations, dinner, lunch, whatever you may have, with potential agents of players that are already on the Broncos roster to maybe bring them back ahead of time here. So this is usually where in the NFL language period, we see a lot of the legal tampering deals actually be made official here Nothing announced, but obviously we see these legal tampering deals made illegally during the NFL scouting combine and then announced during the legal tampering period as something that had just happened. This has happened, and this is the accumulation of it all now.
It is. And thankfully for the Broncos, I think a number of guys that they want to be talking to right now, they're in-house guys, excuse me. So it's not necessarily like they're going to be tampering with their own players, but you're right, Cody. The combine is where a lot of this stuff goes down, and the NFL knows that. Obviously, come on, like they're not oblivious to this. We know the new league year is March 16. The legal tampering or legal negotiating, tampering, whatever they call it now, period, is March 14. So I mean, we're not far off from all this stuff going down anyway. So these agents and these teams, they've got to be getting their ducks in a row. Like all this stuff doesn't go down in a matter of just hours. This takes a lot of time. We've seen in how often in our time as fans or analysts or whatever have you seen anybody that listens or watches football or pays attention to football. It takes months. It takes at least months, if not longer, for contracts to get negotiated. And so you have to understand, like, where's an agent at with a certain player? How do you get there? What's the bonus they're looking for? What's the structure they're looking for? How many years are they trying to get? This at the combine is where a lot of that stuff is going to go down. So, like, obviously it's lying season as well. But at the same time, I think this is a time when you can put plenty of stock into the things that you're reading online from reputable reporters and people who have actual inside information, because what they're getting is actual stuff from agents talking to actual GMs at the combine. And thankfully, Cody, they ditched the bubble thing. I'm glad they did that. Back to normal. Let's go. I'm ready for the rumor mill. That's my favorite thing in the NFL offseason.
Well, there's some things already boiling up a little bit about Aaron Rodgers and his future that actually a decision could be coming this week, and it could be more than likely leaning on him coming back to Green Bay. So we can then, once that officially happens, if it does happen, we can move on and obviously focus on other options, more so the future of the Broncos organization, which I know Broncos fans listening or watching this love to hear that, because Aaron Rodgers has really worn them down. And I get it. It's been tiring, but it's been something like, hey, until something happens, we have to cover it. Now, this is also another opportunity for agents when they have conversation with GMs about their in-house clients. The GM can say, what about this guy that you have there? How's he doing? Like, what does the contract look like for him? Like, those things never will get reported because obviously tampering and you can get fined and obviously lose draft picks by the NFL. But this is where those conversations happen. So, Sayre, the rumor mill is coming this week, and we'll have you covered here, Broncos country, every single day, all year long, because for the true fan, there is no offseason. But with that said, coming up here in just a moment, there's mutual interest between Josey Jewell and the Denver Broncos returning in 2022 in a mutually binding agreement, which is a new contract extension. Will that happen? We weigh the pros and cons. We talk about all the angles here coming up here in just a moment. But let me tell you about the sponsor of today's episode, Locked On Broncos. It's our good friends over there at Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar on the market. My box of Built Bar Puffs, the churro puffs, came in. I'm almost down already. Look, there's 18 that come in the box there. I'm down to about 11 right now in just the last few days, so I might have to cut back just a little bit. But Sayre, I couldn't keep my hands off of Built Bar because it is the best tasting protein bar on the market. Today, the bars are covered in 100% milk chocolate. As you know, my friend, I know you love Built Bar, but they're also soft and easy to chew, especially when you take them out of the box. Me, I like to put them in the fridge and let them sit there for maybe an hour. Take it out. It's a cold, soft, chewy bite. I love it. It's fantastic. And they have 9 amazing, delicious flavors, including the occasional limited time flavor you can get at Built.com. If you need a little bit of extra fuel to help get you through your day, all you got to do is go to Built.com, because the bars contain 17 grams of protein, 130 calories, and only 4 grams of sugar. So go to Built.com today, go to checkout, and use promo code LOCK15, and then I'll get you 15% off your next order at Built.com. As we jump into the second half action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Once again, Broncos country, just want to say thank you so much for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day, every single day. When you wake up in the morning and you go to the gym to work out, or you go to work, or you're making breakfast, or you're getting ready, and you turn on Locked On Broncos with your cup of coffee, we appreciate you. If you don't do that already, we encourage you to try. Sayre and I, we always want to keep you up to date on what the latest is going on with the Denver Broncos from an objective point of view. It means the world to us that you take time out of your day to listen to us, so we want to be able to give back to all of you that do listen. Sayre, speaking of giving back, there's a chance here that the Denver Broncos could give back to a veteran player who, in my opinion, has seemingly earned a chance to come back to Denver in 2022, and that is Josey Jewell, as first reported by our 9 News insider here for the Denver Broncos on the Locked On Network, and also 9 News in general. I just mentioned it there. Mike Klis had said that there is mutual interest by the Broncos organization and Josey Jewell and his agent in them coming to terms on re-signing at some point, and they're hoping to work something out maybe this week. It could be a possibility, or it could take some time. But Josey Jewell, there's mutual interest in him coming back to the Broncos. Now, I think for the fan base, everyone's wondering, well, what about off-ball linebacker? What about what we saw with Kenny Young and Baron Browning? How does that change? Well, you got to take care of your in-house guys first to really have that answer. So, your thoughts on maybe Josey Jewell coming back to Denver here in 2022?
Well, you know me, Cody, and the listeners know at this point pretty well. I love the Iowa Hawkeyes, and Josey Jewell is one of my all-time favorite Hawkeyes. So when the Broncos drafted him, I was just beyond excited about it. I absolutely loved it, and I've loved watching his progression over these last 4 seasons, right? I mean, I know it was a small sample size, but if you go back even to the beginning of the 2020 season, Cody, against the Tennessee Titans, the hit stick on Derrick Henry in week 1, and then he just kind of played well all year long. It wasn't like he was like, oh my gosh, like he's playing like an all-pro, but consistent improvement, I think, is what we've seen from Josey Jewell since he kind of was replaced at kind of Wally pipped in 2019 by Alexander Johnson. Then he get back into the lineup in 2020 and replace Todd Davis. He looks really good to me. And to begin the 2021 season, like we've talked about a couple of times, I mean, he was playing some of the best football of his career. Obviously got injured on a play in which he just absolutely destroyed a guy on special teams as well, too. So, I mean, Josey's playing fast. He's playing smart. He's a great fit for this defense. I think Ejiro Evero obviously said, anybody that played in this defense last year, there's going to be plenty of carryover. And I think that's important in this equation. But also the fact that George Paton has said, Josey Jewell, he name dropped him in an article on DenverBroncos.com. So you got to kind of just stay on the alert for any time George Paton speaks. But he name dropped him and said he's kind of a glue guy for the defense. And so your general manager is not just saying that. I mean, obviously he's like, we need to talk to the coaching staff and stuff to talk about whether or not he'll be back. But obviously Josey Jewell, a guy that you can rely on to make the calls for your defense, to wear the green dot, somebody who's shown great improvement, fits the bill of what George Paton likes to emphasize in terms of player development and re-signing your own guys. To me, it's a no-brainer. And I gave you the abridged version there, Cody. That's kind of my abridged thoughts. I know it seemed like a mouthful there, but man, those are my abridged thoughts on bringing back Josey Jewell, and I love, love, love the idea.
Well, I'm glad that you do, because I've been on board of saying, hey, I'd like to see Josey Jewell back in a Broncos uniform. Looking 4 years for the Broncos. He started in 30 games, and you mentioned that unfortunate injury. It really ended what I felt like could have been a really special season for him. I mean, we talk about like really good inside linebackers. We saw Blake Martinez for the Giants in week 1 against Denver. They lost him early on. That impacted their defense the rest of the way. The Broncos lost Josey Jewell in week 2. That impacted their defense for the rest of the way. And it just, it was one of those things too. You mentioned he's a true leader. He understands his defense really, really well. He's a true Mike linebacker, but he can also be used to blitz. Like, remember when Vic Fangio would send Josey Jewell? Good things happened for the Broncos. Pressure got there, but it was that dynamic that they certainly didn't have. And all of a sudden we're like, hey, Vic, how come you didn't start blitzing the linebackers a lot more? Like it took that Thursday night game against the Jets in 2020 on Thursday Night Football, the Brett Rippon game, for us to really see the value and what Josey Jewell could do as a blitzing linebacker. So I like it. I think he's perfect for the Broncos base defense, which allows you, like when you go nickel, when you go dime, you can rotate other guys in, like the Baron Brownings, the potential Kenny Youngs, the Jonas Griffiths by chance. I think it's something that people need to keep an eye on here. And I think a lot of people say, well, if the Broncos bring back this guy, then that means this guy's not coming back. I mean, it could mean that for Alexander Johnson. It could mean that for even Josey Jewell, if in fact they can't come to terms on a deal. What does it mean for Kenny Young? We don't know yet, because Kenny Young is set to become an unrestricted free agent, and he has a chance to go wherever he wants. And so a lot of that is going to be contingent upon how he feels maybe coming back in 2022, and especially what the market value will be. Here's something, though, that Klis reported in his column on Sunday, though, Sayre, that really stood out to me about Josey Jewell. He said that despite a season-ending injury, Josey Jewell was involved every single day in team meetings, position meetings. He traveled with the team, and he did everything with the team. So even though that you get hurt, like how often do we see guys get hurt and then go rehab on their own? They're kind of secluded a little bit from what's going on with the team. Josey Jewell was involved every single day. So I think him and obviously new linebacker coach Peter Hansen, they've probably already spoken, even though that Josey's set to become a free agent. We'll see what happens here. But, man, I want to see Josey Jewell back in Denver. I think it's going to be huge. I think that Broncos country is interested in maybe some other questions about linebacker as well. So I want to get to a question from Colton on Twitter, and he threw out the question to us, Sayre. He said, what off-ball linebacker can you see Denver taking the second or third rounds, or even if they do that, because they have to, obviously, if they're going to re-sign Kenny Young, Josey Jewell, or Alexander Johnson, what does that look like? In my opinion, Sayre, I don't think that Denver is going to look at linebacker unless it's an absolute huge need in the draft. I don't think in round 1, 2, or 3 they're going to look at inside linebacker personally because of what we saw from Jonas Griffith, from what we saw from Baron Browning. And if you do bring back Josey Jewell, you're solidifying that position. You still have Justin Sternad, who can also grow into that role as well. Linebacker seems a little unlikely for me, at least for Denver in the first 3 rounds.
I think so too, and obviously also Micah Kiser is a restricted free agent, so could probably pretty easily bring him back for depth as well. So that's, if you were able to re-sign Josey Jewell, that's 5 guys already, Cody, that you can play. I mean, you can put out there that the Broncos did put out there as starters last season. So, I mean, of course, out of necessity, to answer the question though, which I think is a valid question, like what if in the second or third round, what if such and such a player ends up being the best player on your board? My favorite day 2 linebacker as of right now is Chad Muma from Wyoming.
Yeah.
A guy that really kind of fits the bill of like the Fred Warner body type, athletic type, just kind of flying around the field instinctively. Just an absolute stud. Exactly. There's something in the water over there at Wyoming these days at the linebacker position. They're cranking out NFL guys the last few years. So, but Chad Muma, he's a guy that I think you got to keep an eye on. The Broncos have 5 selections right now in the top 100 picks. That's big time draft capital. And if you get the opportunity to say, hey, a guy like Chad Muma is our best player on our board, maybe that's what you do. I don't know that that was necessarily the case with Baron Browning last year. I feel like, maybe Quinn Miners was more of a situation of, hey, he's just the best guy on our board, whereas Baron Browning really in the back end of round 3 felt like you're filling a need. I don't think that's as big of a need right now. I feel like it's really overpronounced in Broncos country, just as a whole, not the person who asked the question on Twitter, just as a whole. It feels like the linebacker position gets overblown in terms of the need there. So to me, I would say stay away, even with 4 picks on day 2 right now, which is awesome to say. I love saying that. That's my favorite thing in the world. But I would say absolutely Chad Muma an option there in round 2 or 3.
You know what's even better than, those 4 picks on day 2? The fact that the Broncos have 11 total picks right now in the 2022 NFL draft. Denver had 10 last year, Sayre, and look what they were able to do with 10. Well, they didn't have 10 to start, but they ended up having 10 due to George Paton being as good of a negotiator as he is with other teams and moving up. We can all talk about it. The Broncos draft class from last year, Sayre, it has so much potential to be one of the best draft classes in Broncos team history. And really for George Paton getting off to a great start. Can he build on that? Well, guess what? 11 picks. Sayre, we're going to find out here real soon. But Broncos country coming up here in just a moment. We're going to answer a mailbag question about who are some ideal offensive tackle candidates in Nathaniel Hackett's scheme, not to mention some other Broncos upcoming deadline moves that they might have to make and things that are approaching that Broncos fans need to be aware of. You get that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about BetOnline.net, the sponsor of today's episode, Locked On Broncos. There's 2 weekends in a row that we have not known what to do with football season being over. But guess what? Basketball is in full steam for both pro and college hoops with BetOnline. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance props to where the next fired coach is going to land, BetOnline is the #1 spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds, right to the Olympic coverage and more. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action at BetOnline.net. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Sayre, jumping into the 4th quarter action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, getting into a little bit of a mailbag here in just a moment from an avid listener here of the show, Andy Cowick. Before we get to his question, though, some things coming up here for the Denver Broncos that people, have been asking me. I'm sure you've gotten the same kind of responses on Twitter. The Broncos right now, obviously every year, the franchise tag window has opened. Who could the Broncos franchise tag? And I think when you look at this roster right now, you don't imagine, I don't think they're going to franchise tag anybody. And the vibe right now in Broncos country is that Denver will not place the franchise tag on any player. In your opinion, is this good? Is this bad? Is there anybody they should place a franchise tag on?
I don't think so. The one player that it might have been, or maybe two, Cortland Sutton, Tim Patrick, those guys obviously got their long-term deals, right? So now you're looking at, I mean, there was a situation last year where like maybe if Kyle Fuller came out and played at like a big time all-pro level, maybe you would have considered that. But as of right now, I just don't see it. I don't even know if Von Miller would have been eligible for that, Cody. I can't remember if there was anything written in his contract extension that he signed way back when. But at this point, I mean, Bryce Callahan, are you going to franchise tag Bryce Callahan? Highly doubtful. Are you going to put the franchise tag for a linebacker, which is an extremely high price because they lump, different linebackers into that group? I don't see that happening. So, I mean, I think it's a great position to be in to not have to use it. And that speaks to George Paton's philosophy, right? He wants to re-sign his guys. I think the franchise tag should always be a last resort rather than a first response. And so I think that that's definitely a good position for the Broncos to be in.
Players will love you as a general manager just for that very reason there, Sayre. So maybe one day we'll make Sayre the general manager of some football team. And also another thing that's coming up for Denver, a potential the deadline for the fifth-year option on tight end Noah Fant. It's going to be coming up here, and obviously it's worth around $6.85 million. It's a $6.85 million option here. Do you think that the Broncos pick it up? Part of me, Sayre, it's like, I look at it in context. When you look at tight end, a lot of things not necessarily in Noah Fant's control outside of, certain things like his play, his production, but like he can't control who's throwing him the football. And obviously we had to sit down with him at Super Bowl Radio Row where he talked about like, I can't worry about all the changes that we have, all the quarterbacks that are coming in, all the different offensive coordinators. I just have to focus on what I can do to keep growing and keep getting better. This is a lot different than when the Broncos had to face the decision on either picking up or declining Garrett Bowles' fifth-year option. I just don't see Denver at this point declining his option. I think they pick it up because I think that he's still a valuable part of the offense.
He is, and that price point, $6.8 million, is an extreme value. Even looking at the franchise tag number for tight ends right now, which I think is like $11 million or something like that. I mean, it's insanely low compared to other position groups. I mean, when we're talking about obviously the quarterback position, that skews it, or edge rushers, they get skewed. But man, when you're looking at the tight end position, even the franchise tag is palatable. So looking at the fifth-year option plus the franchise tag for Noah Fant, if you have to go that route, that's going to be less than, I think, $20 million guaranteed over the next 2 seasons. And I know that sounds like a lot to a lot of people for a guy like Noah Fant, a lot of people have been so split on him, which is so weird to me. Led the team in receptions last year after, he's consistently been good for the team. He's been available. I think he's only missed 2 games in his entire career. So to me, again, I agree with you. I think that definitely you pick up that option. And again, the franchise tag is absolutely a last resort, but at the same time, you have that in your pocket to say, oh, well, if we can't get a long-term deal done, we can get him at a really reasonable price in 2023 at this point. So, even looking ahead, that gives you some negotiating leverage, the low franchise tag number. I look at Noah Fant in the same way that I see Draymond Jones, Cody. I think after the dust settles from the draft, I say you try to get an extension done with him to keep him around, not just for his 5th-year option, but add another 3 or 4 years on top of that.
I'm with it. I'm definitely here with that as well. Like I said, I think Noah Fant, the best is yet to come for him. And I think if he goes elsewhere ever, I think we're going to see him really emerge in a scheme that's maybe tailor-made to what he does best. But this is where Nathaniel Hackett comes in. Can he help Noah Fant get there? Which I do believe that he could. We saw him scheme up on his little iPad there on the screen on the latest episode Behind the Broncos, just the things, the concepts, how he loves to attack defenses. I'm excited for it. But let's get into our mailbag question on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. It's from Andy Cowick at Red Lobster 826 on Twitter. He asks us the question, what are some ideal traits for an offensive tackle prospect to best fit Nathaniel Hackett's system? This is a great question. Which of the projected day 1 to 2 guys do you like best for the Broncos? Now, in terms of traits here, before I give my guys, I think that somebody who's athletic enough to be able to step and steal the edge, right? When we talk about the outside zones concept out of the West Coast style of offense, it's going to be a lot of flow and misdirection, right? So if the Broncos are going to run play action, roll out to the right, the offensive line, they're going to step and sell heavy to the left side. But then after that, if there is a run or if there is that, it's being able to sell that and then step backside. So somebody who's got really good hips, I think you have to have great hip movement, great footwork if you're going to be an offensive tackle in this scheme. But more importantly, you have to have a nasty side to you, Sayre. So based on that alone, like the two guys I'm looking at here for the Denver Broncos, first off, I want to start off with NC State offensive tackle Ikem Ekwonu. Now, I had a chance to sit down with him in Los Angeles, and he has been deemed as the mauler of the ACC. And I think when you go back and you watch his tape, the way that he buries guys, it's kind of exciting. And look, he said he could play left tackle, he could play right tackle, he could also play guard. Like, he's got the ability to be a swing player here for any team that decides to draft him. And he could be the potential first overall pick. I mean, there's talk about him potentially being that as well. But if he does drop, I honestly wouldn't be opposed to that, because I do think that he does fit the needs of what the Broncos could utilize specifically for an athletic right tackle. That's where he'll more than likely play. I don't think the Broncos will ever think about moving Garrett Bowles, and rightfully so. Why? If it's not broke, don't fix it. But then there's Trevor Penning out of Northern Iowa. And Sayre, I know you like Iowa guys, but just in the state of Iowa in general, even going to high school football, there is something about Iowa football players that are physical, mean, and nasty. Trevor Penning would also be another one of my guys that feel like could be that right tackle option for the Broncos. Do you agree, or who are your guys if they're differing?
I absolutely agree with those two names, especially, I mean, just the fact those two guys, I think they could step in and start for you immediately at the next level, which is really saying something, especially for a guy from Northern Iowa. I don't know what it is about the players that get recruited to play at Iowa schools, specifically. I mean, obviously we're talking about Northern Iowa in this case, but also the Iowa Hawkeyes. A lot of these guys have backgrounds in wrestling, and you know, like you talk about the fact that you got to have that nasty side to you. I mean, in the state of Iowa, I mean, especially for the Iowa Hawkeyes, I know wrestling is a really, really big deal. So you get guys that have a wrestling background or different sort of track and field backgrounds. I mean, they've got that athleticism. They've got that upper body strength. They've got the ability to get out and move in space. And they've got, if they get their hands on you, you're done for. That's the kind of thing that I think you look for. I just looked up the prototype, I think, is Ryan Clady, obviously from the class of 2008, a tremendous pick by the Denver Broncos. At the time, actually, it wasn't overly very popular.
Yeah.
As I remember, I can't remember the other tackle that fans were wanting at the time, but there was a different offensive tackle, and maybe somebody in the comments can jog my memory here, but I'm just trying to think of it off the top of my head. There was another tackle that everyone was like, it was a guy that got picked by the Bears, I believe. So somebody everybody else wanted, but Ryan Clady, just looking at his measurements, 6'6", 309. He ran a 5.18 in the 40-yard dash, a 10-yard split of 1.81, both very, very good numbers. 24 bench press reps, which is also very, very good. And then just extremely explosive. I mean, he got the highest score possible, a 10 out of 10 on the relative athletic score scale, Cody, with a 7.07 in the 3-cone drill, which obviously measures your short area agility and burst. So that's the kind of things I think you're looking for. Just a guy that has really good overall size. I think you don't necessarily need to be 300 plus pounds, but that's ideal, with long arms, the ability to finish, and the ability to get out in space. So guys that I look for that fit that description in this draft, they're all over the place. You could look at the top of the class with guys like Charles Cross out of Mississippi State, Evan Neal out of Alabama. Will either of those guys be available on the board at pick number 9 overall? I don't know if that's going to be the case. If they are, I mean, how quickly does George Paton run to the podium, to get that pick in? There's also another guy that I think, obviously, he's a little bit older of a prospect. I think he's going to be 24 or 25 this season, but Bernard Raymond from Central Michigan, we're going to see this guy light up the combine, Cody, a former tight end who looks like Ivan Drago. I mean, he is an absolute specimen, and he can get out there and he can absolutely move. I bet you he could still play tight end, if teams wanted him to do that. But he's the type of guy that I think those are all first-round guys, I think, that we mentioned. But this draft class, it is so, so deep at the tackle position. You could look all the way down the line at guys that could fit this scheme that are just, it's up and down the draft. I mean, it's such a good class. And so I don't think you have to pigeonhole yourself into tackles in the first round of this class. But the guys that we mentioned, I think, are the guys that are going to absolutely destroy like Evan Neal. If you haven't seen the jumping split that he does, where he jumps on the boxes and lands with 1 foot on one box in front of him and another foot behind him, it's ridiculous how athletic this guy is. So these guys are going to kill the combine. There was that combine in 2020. Remember, Cody, when like Mekhi Becton ran like a sub 5-second 40-yard dash or whatever it was at 370 pounds. And then Tristan Wirfs, I mean, just out there blazing by everybody.
Best tackle in that class by far.
Exactly. And that was a great, great tackle class. I feel like this class could rival it. I mean, it's maybe not as hyped, but I feel like it could rival it for sure, at least in terms of these guys being great athletes. I think we're going to see some serious stuff on the field from those guys at the combine.
Well, Broncos country, we're eager for your thoughts on this year's offensive tackle class. Which prospects would you look at in day 1 or day 2 if you were in control of the Denver Broncos organization? Plus, also comment down below here, FTA or for the algorithm here. It helps push us out to more members of Broncos country. If you do that, we appreciate your support. As always, Broncos country, the NFL Scout and Combine begins on Tuesday, which is tomorrow. So Sayre, Bedinger, and myself, you know we have you covered with everything that's going on. Anything that we hear, we'll obviously touch on, we'll share, and we'll get Broncos country's thoughts on it as well here on the Locked On Broncos podcast.